Hey, what's up, guys? Gons here with this week's word of encouragement. It comes from Colossians 4, verses 5 and 6. Here's what it says. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Now it starts off here, walk in wisdom towards outsiders. You know, there's this belief that Christians need to live their life in a prayer closet, and we ought not to be like the Pharisees and things like that. And that's true. But there also has to be a practical, lived out Christianity in that we have to live in this world day by day. And Paul here is telling us that we need to walk in wisdom towards outsiders, outsiders being those outside the community of believers, the called out ones, the church, the ecclesia, making the best use of the time. Some translations have this as making most of the opportunity. In the back of our minds, we really do have to see every encounter outside of people in your family or friends or church members as an opportunity to share the gospel. But even if you're not directly sharing it, the passage here in Colossians is telling us to walk in wisdom towards those who are outside. But more importantly, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Now, we're living in this post-2016 election world where conservatives and evangelicals have really become outspoken in making fun of and belittling the liberal logic that's out there. And certainly, as a Christian, as someone who leans on the conservative side of the aisle in terms of the political issues, I can totally understand pointing out and making fun of the liberal lunatics, as some have labeled them. I think I'm even guilty of that on this channel. But I would caution those who do that, because it says here, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. In classical literature, salt is expressed as wit, making the conversation flavorful and interesting. So this idea of letting your speech towards the outside world be gracious and seasoned with salt is very important in the approach to share the gospel, because it will put you in the right frame of mind to know how to answer each person and to handle the situation, right? So think about this. In this 2-verse passage, you have walk in wisdom. You need that wisdom towards outsiders. You need to make best use of that time when you're interacting with the world. And then let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that, Paul gives us a reason, you may know how you ought to answer each person. The person that's wise, the person that has grace in their heart, and the person that's interesting to talk to, doesn't matter what belief system you're from or what opposing side of the aisle politically or whatever, it doesn't matter. You can have a good conversation with someone that is diametrically opposed to you in your worldview if you walk in wisdom towards them, if you let your speech have grace and you season it with salt. And you'll be able to handle all those conversations or difficult moments that you might have with people who are outside of the faith. And a lot of times that could be family, that can be friends and things like that. So be encouraged this week. Think about how you interact with the world. Think about how you interact with people outside of your inner circle of faith or church or whatever. And be conscious about your approach to them and your interaction with them. Are you showing them grace? Are you seasoning your speech with salt? Are you making the conversation interesting? Are you making that personal relationship, that personal connection? Because remember, Christianity at its core is not a religion, it's a relationship, right? It's a relationship with Jesus Christ. So people aren't going to find God through textbooks or basic theology. Some people do, and it helps. I'm not saying those things aren't good, but ultimately, what changes people's hearts are relationships. And these 2 passages here are key into unlocking the types of conversations and the depth of conversation and interaction you can have with people who may disagree with your worldview. So again, I hope that encourages you this week. Walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Have an awesome week, guys. God bless.